The ice on the window pane had grown thick enough to trace patterns in, and Neve had been staring at it for the better part of an hour instead of sleeping. That was how she spent most nights now. 3 years since the cold water purge had taken her parents and her pack and her wolf all at once, and sleep had become a country with a closed border. She pressed her thumbnail into the frost. It gave way in a clean white line. The iron hollow pack didn't treat her badly. That was the part she had never been able to explain to herself, the part that made the whole arrangement so difficult to resist. There was no cruelty here that required effort. No one raised their hand or their voice. They simply operated on the assumption that a packmate without a wolf was approximately equal to a chair. Present, occasionally useful, not worth addressing directly. Her name had been on the duty roster since the month she arrived, 3 years ago, when the Northern Highway was still passable and she'd walked 14 kilometers in February to get here because there was nowhere else left. Back then she'd been listed under skills and contributions as healer's apprentice, because her mother had been a healer, and Neve had watched her work every day of her life, and knew more about wound care than anyone in Iron Hollow cared to acknowledge. Then the healer retired. The new one brought his own apprentice, and Neve's listing changed to general maintenance without anyone mentioning it to her. General maintenance meant the forge. Not working the forge, she had no rank for that. Maintaining it, cleaning the ash from the pit each morning before the smith arrived, sweeping iron filings from the floor, hauling buckets of water for the cooling troughs, her shoulders aching by noon, her hands blistered in places that no longer bothered to blister, just went hard and smooth and permanent. She didn't mind the work. The work was honest. The work didn't look through her. It was mid-November. The forge room was the warmest place in the Iron Hollow compound, which was the only reason she'd been using the storage loft above it as a bedroom for the past 18 months. Technically, the loft was for equipment. Technically, Neve was sleeping on a folded tarpaulin next to 3 broken anvils and a rack of unmounted blades, and the pack's housing coordinator had never once come up the ladder to see whether there was a person doing that or not. She heard the doors of the main hall open and close 3 times in quick succession, which meant someone important had arrived or something had gone wrong. In Iron Hollow, those 2 things were often the same event. Neve climbed down from the loft. The corridor outside the forge was busy in the way the compound rarely was after dark, wolves moving with purpose, their footsteps quick and directed. She caught fragments. The word delegation, the words Northern Accord, and then a name she'd heard only in the same way you hear thunder when you're already indoors. Aldrich. Not that Aldrich. There were 3 wolves by that name in the file her mother had kept. She meant the other one. Aldrich Ben, the Iron Warden of the Stone Pass Dominion. Not a king. They didn't use that word in the mountain territories. It was considered excessive, but the closest thing. He governed every pack within 200 kilometers of the Stone Pass Ridge, held the border treaties together through a combination of political intelligence, and what everyone agreed was a frankly unreasonable amount of personal force. He was 31 and had been governing since 24 when his predecessor stepped down after the conflict that the northern packs politely called the Accord Crisis and everyone else called the worst 2 years in recent memory. His mate had never been identified. Neve heard that last part through the partition wall while she was supposed to be hauling ash. 2 of the senior packwomen were talking in the hallway, just outside the forge room door, their voices low and carrying the particular pitch of people, discussing something they found simultaneously fascinating and relevant to their own ambitions. She didn't listen. She had learned 3 years ago that other people's hopes had a way of making her aware of the absence of her own. The ash bucket was full. She carried it outside to the disposal trench at the north edge of the compound, her breath making clouds in the dark, the cold biting at the bare skin of her wrists above her work gloves. The compound was lit up in a way it rarely was, every window warm, the training ground torches burning despite the hour. Someone had hung lanterns along the main corridor. Iron Hollow was trying to look like a pack that had its affairs in order. Neve knew better. She'd cleaned the forge room floor. She was coming back in through the side entrance, the one the maintenance workers used when the feeling hit her. Not pain. Not even sensation, exactly. More like a sound she felt in her teeth. She stopped walking. Her hand went to her sternum without her deciding to put it there, pressing flat against the front of her jacket where her ribs were, where the place her wolf used to live was, and where, for 3 years, there had been nothing but a clean, flat silence, the way a room sounds after a door slams and the echo finishes. Something moved, not a twitch, not a flutter, a full deliberate pressure, like something turning over in deep water. Neve stood in the snow outside the Iron Hollow compound's side entrance and breathed very carefully. The feeling faded. She waited. It didn't come back. She went inside. By morning, the compound had transformed in the way only impending important visitors could manage. Packmates, who normally wore whatever was nearest to hand, were dressed in the Iron Hollow formal colors, deep grey and amber, their postures consciously improved. The common hall had real tablecloths. Someone had found pine boughs and put them in the windows, and the effect was almost convincing if you didn't know what the windows usually looked like. Neve ate, standing in the kitchen doorway. Hard bread and cold venison broth from the pot that was always on the back burner, the one she'd long ago identified as the unofficial Omega pot. She held the bowl close. The broth was thin, but it was warm, and warmth was something she had learned to treat as a resource rather than a given. The warden's convoy arrived at midday. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of vehicles on the gravel approach, heavier than the usual supply runs, and beneath that sound a kind of atmospheric shift. A pressure change she couldn't name, but her body registered instinctively. The hairs on her arms stood up. The feeling from the night before returned, stronger. Not a turning, a push. She should have been in the forge room. That was where maintenance workers stayed during formal arrivals, out of sight, out of the pack's narrative about itself. But her feet had taken her to the edge of the compound's interior courtyard before she'd made any conscious decision about it, and now she was standing with her back against the old timber wall of the equipment shed, watching the convoy come through the gates. The wolves who stepped out were not what the stories prepared you for. Stories about the Iron Warden talked about power, about the Stone Pass Dominion's military record, about the border restructuring he'd managed in his first year that had kept 3 packs from open conflict. They talked about him the way you talk about weather systems, vast, impersonal, inevitable. What she saw was a man standing in a courtyard. He was tall. He had the build of someone who worked physically rather than decoratively, dense through the chest and shoulders, and he moved with the specific economy of a person who has learned that unnecessary motion is a liability. His hair was dark brown, almost black at the nape, and his jaw was the kind of strong that photographers liked and that mostly meant someone had a lot of opinions that didn't change easily. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, thin and pale, old. His eyes were dark grey, not dramatic, just grey, like the underside of a northern sky before it commits to weather. He was listening to Iron Hollow's pack lead, a man named Gregor, who was explaining something with the careful enthusiasm of someone trying to impress a person they weren't sure could be impressed. The warden listened with total stillness, and then he stopped listening. It happened between 1 second and the next. His head turned, not toward Gregor, not toward his own convoy, toward the edge of the courtyard, toward the shadow between the equipment shed and the old storage building, where a woman in a maintenance worker's grey jacket stood with her hand pressed flat against her sternum and her dark eyes very wide. He looked at her the way a compass looks at north, like he'd been oriented toward something else his entire life and had only just been told where it actually was. Neve couldn't move. The feeling in her chest had gone from a push to a roar, something vast and urgent pressing outward against her ribs with a force that made it difficult to breathe. Her wolf. 3 years of silence, and it was here, now, and it was not dormant, it was not gone, it was present and enormous and desperate, and it knew him. The warden said something. She couldn't hear the words, only the quality of them, low, quiet, the kind of quiet that had nothing to prove. Gregor's face did something complicated. She could read it from 40 feet away. The mental recalculation, the flicker of strategy, whatever he'd been planning to say about her, and she knew with a cold certainty that he'd been planning to say something, died behind his teeth. The warden was already moving. He covered the distance between them, without hurrying and without stopping, the way water moves downhill. He stopped when he was close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and the smell of him hit her, stone and cold air, and something underneath that was warm in a way that made no sense for a man who'd just come in from the November highway. Pine smoke, cedar wood, the particular scent of snow melting on wool. Her wolf threw itself forward, and Niamh actually gasped, her hand pressing harder against her chest as if she could hold it in by force. His eyes widened, just slightly, pupils expanding. "When did you last sleep?" he said. "Of all the things, of all the possible first words." She stared at him. "I sleep fine," she said, which was a lie so practiced it came out smoothly. Something moved in his expression. Not quite disbelief. The particular look of someone who has just received a report that doesn't match their direct observation. "You're pressing your hand against your chest like you're trying to hold something in," he said. His voice was very even. "And you have the look of someone who has been cold for a long time and gotten used to it. How long have you been in Iron Hollow?" 3 years. "And before that?" "The cold water pack." She kept her voice flat. Before the purge, his jaw tightened. It was subtle, just a slight shift in the muscle beneath the scar, the cold water purge. He said it the way you say the name of something that left damage. "I know the history, then you know there's not much left to know." He looked at her, not the way Gregor looked at her, not the way anyone in Iron Hollow looked at her, which was mostly not at all. He looked at her the way you look at something you want to understand correctly before you say a word about it. "What's your name?" "Niamh." "Just Niamh?" "Niamh Calloway." She said the last name like it was something she still had a right to. He nodded once, like this was important information. Then he turned his head toward Gregor, who was standing 10 feet away with the expression of a man watching something he cannot stop and hasn't yet decided how to respond to. "Gregor." His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "Tell me about your maintenance assignments." Gregor started. I asked about assignments. "Not people. The forge maintenance," Gregor said. "General compound upkeep." "And she's housed where?" "The equipment loft above the forge." The warden turned back to Niamh. There was something in his eyes that she recognized, not because she'd seen it directed at her before, but because she knew it from the inside. Rage, very controlled, pointed precisely at the source of something that should not have been allowed to happen. "You'll be moved to the guest quarters," he said. "They're for your delegation. Your delegation has camping equipment and the adaptability required of a functional border force," he said to Gregor without looking at him. "The guest quarters will be used for Ms. Calloway." Niamh opened her mouth. "I know," he said. "You were going to tell me it's unnecessary. I was going to tell you I still have to finish the forge room before the smith arrives at 6. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, the architectural suggestion of one. "The forge room," he said, "can wait." She was installed in the guest quarters within the hour. They were simple. Iron Hollow was not a wealthy pack, but simple meant a real bed, not a folding tarp. Clean sheets, a wash basin with water that was actually warm, a window that faced east toward the Stone Pass Ridge, where the mountains were dark shapes holding back the sky. She sat on the edge of the bed, and her wolf moved again, slower now, and she pressed her palm to her chest and felt it the way you feel a second heartbeat. Present, real, not gone. For 3 years the pack healer had told her varying versions of the same story. Trauma response, dissociation of the wolf self, common after catastrophic loss. It will return when the body is ready. And then, 8 months in, a different version. "I can't locate it," he'd said. Not dormant, not hidden. I genuinely cannot find it. And after that, nothing more was said, because a wolf without a wolf was an omega without standing, and omegas without standing did forge maintenance and slept in equipment lofts, and were not, practically speaking, worth a healer's diagnostic time. She had stopped trying to feel for it after the first year. Now it was here, and it was not small. The warden came to the guest quarters after he'd finished the initial meeting with Iron Hollow's leadership. She heard his knock before she heard his footsteps, which told her she'd been listening for him without meaning to. He brought food. Not personally, a packmate carried the tray, but he'd clearly specified the contents because what arrived was not the standard guest meal: elk stew with actual herbs in it, fresh bread, still warm, a wedge of sharp cheese, sliced apple, a pot of tea so dark it was nearly black. "Eat," he said, and took the chair by the door. He wasn't performing patience. He was simply patient the way a rock face is patient, not because patience is a virtue it has decided to practice, but because that's what it's made of. She ate the bread first. Her hands were shaking. She hated that. The stew was extraordinary. Someone in his convoy's kitchen had been given instructions, she realized, because the herbs were northern, juniper, dried thyme, something earthy she couldn't name, and the elk had been cooked long and slow until it was almost sweet. She drank the tea and felt it move through her like something her body had been asking about for years. He didn't speak until the tray was empty. "Your wolf has been there the entire time," he said. "I know that now. The healer told you it was gone. The healer told me what made sense given what he could measure." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his grey eyes steady. "I've seen this once. A wolf whose power was so far outside the normal range that the pack's healer had no frame of reference for it. Not absent, compressed. Like a spring that can't release because nothing in its environment is strong enough to trigger it." She set down the teacup. "I'm an omega," she said. He looked at her the way someone looks at a compass that's been told it's pointing wrong. "Who told you that?" "Everyone. After the purge. No wolf, no rank. That's the rule." His jaw tightened again. "That's not my rule." He stood. He was very tall in the low-ceilinged guest room. "I need to speak with Gregor." He paused at the door. "Don't leave this room. Not because I'm confining you, because his second-in-command has been asking where you went, and I don't know Iron Hollow's internal politics well enough to trust that man yet." Neve looked up. "What man?" "The one with the limp who watches you when he thinks no one is watching him." She knew exactly who he meant. His name was Corvin. Not on her list, a new one, she thought, with the flat eyes of someone who had calculated his position carefully and didn't appreciate variables. He'd been with Iron Hollow's border patrol for 2 years, and he'd never looked at Neve directly. Not until this morning, when the convoy arrived and everything changed. The door closed, she sat in the quiet. The wolf in her chest had gone from a roar to a low, steady hum, like a frequency settling after an impact. She could feel its outline now, its actual shape. Not lean, not the compact prairie wolf build that most of Iron Hollow's omegas carried. Whatever was inside her was large and deep-set and very patient, the way things are patient when they have been waiting for the right reason to stop waiting. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and the wolf pressed back. She didn't mean to fall asleep. She lay down on the real bed with its real mattress, and she was going to think about the situation clearly and rationally, and she was going to have a plan by the time the warden returned, and instead she was asleep in under 3 minutes, which told her something about what 3 years of tarpaulin floors and 6 a.m. forge starts had done to her system. She woke to grey light and the smell of coffee. The chair by the door was empty. On the side table was a fresh tray, eggs, toasted bread, a bowl of cut fruit, and a note written in handwriting that was precise and economical, the way engineers write. "I've completed the initial assessment with Gregor's counsel. 3 points of concern flagged. Back by midday. The guard outside the door is mine. She's called Vessa and she bites, but only on request. Eat before the eggs go cold. No signature, he didn't need one." She ate all of it. The morning passed in a strange suspended quality. Vessa, A compact, red-haired wolf with a scar across her chin, and the demeanor of someone who found most situations professionally manageable, confirmed that Corvin had been sent to the north perimeter on a reassignment that was technically routine and practically very far from the guest quarters. When she asked how the warden had managed that without a formal authority claim, Vessa looked at her with something that was almost but not quite amusement. "He's the Iron Warden," she said. "He managed it by saying so." He returned at noon. He looked like a man who had been having measured conversations with people he found inadequate for 6 hours and had managed it without allowing any of that to show until he was out of their sight. He sat in the chair by the door and accepted the coffee Vessa brought him and was quiet for a moment in the way people are quiet when they are deciding what is essential. "Gregor's accounts don't balance," he said. "Resource allocation for the past 2 years shows significant discrepancy between what the pack reported to the Dominion and what the maintenance records suggest was actually spent." He looked at her. How many wolves in this pack are operating below the basic provision standard? She considered pretending she didn't know. Old habit. 11, she said. Most of them border adjacent, assigned to the outer posts. They get what's left after the senior ranks are served. And the equipment loft, that's just me. He set his coffee down. "Just you," he said, "just me." The silence that followed had a specific texture. She'd learned to read silences over 3 years, and this one was the kind that precedes a decision that had already been made, but was being allowed a moment before being enacted. "I want to talk to you about your wolf," he said. Her hand moved to her chest before she could stop it. He watched it happen without comment. There are ways to reach a compressed wolf. He spoke carefully, like someone who had considered the best approach to a fragile mechanism. It doesn't respond to the same triggers as a standard suppression. It needs something powerful enough to reach it. An external frequency. A call it can't ignore. What kind of call? He looked at her, and she saw the answer before he said it, in the slight shift of his expression, the way his grey eyes changed their quality. Darker, more direct. "An alpha's call," he said. A specific one. She understood. The mate's call. She also understood that he was asking, not telling, that the way he'd phrased it was deliberate, that he was giving her the frame of the choice before he let her step into it. "When," she said, "when you're ready." She thought about saying not today. She thought about asking for more time, more certainty, more information. Her wolf made none of those arguments from inside her chest. It was pressing upward with a clarity that felt almost impatient. 3 years of silence against 3 years of silence. 2 things that had been waiting for the same reason. "Tomorrow," she said. He nodded. Like this was reasonable and he would accept it. "There's one more thing," Neve said. He waited. "I need to know something first." "She looked you actually want." "From this." "From me." "From me." He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. Considering. "Stone Pass is fractured," he said finally. "Not structurally, politically. I've held the border accords for 7 years by being the most credible force in the room. That works until it doesn't. There are packs pulling away from the Dominion because they've stopped believing the central authority understands their situation." He paused. A wolf of significant power, aligned with the Warden's territory, with direct knowledge of what it means to be the smallest person in a pack that has forgotten it, has obligations to its own. That's not a political asset. "Then, what is it?" "It's a person," he said, "who I would rather have beside me than anywhere else. Because my wolf has been pacing since I crossed Iron Hollow's southern border last night, and it doesn't pace for political assets." She didn't say anything for a moment. "The forge room," she said. He looked at her. "I need to know if you're actually going to make Gregor account for the 11 wolves on the outer posts, or if this conversation is going to end the way conversations about resource discrepancy usually end in packs like this." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, grey eyes steady. "I have already filed a formal notice of corrective assessment with the Dominion Record Office," he said. "Gregor will have 30 days to demonstrate compliance with basic provision standards for every wolf in this pack. If he fails to demonstrate compliance, I will appoint a provisional lead from within Iron Hollow's own ranks, and Gregor will answer to the council." He paused. "The 11 wolves have already been moved to the inner quarters this morning. I did that before I came back here." "Oh," she said. "Yes." She looked at the window. The mountains were clearer today, the snow line visible, the Stone Pass ridge showing its actual shape against the sky. "Tomorrow," she said again. "Tomorrow," he agreed. The clearing was half a kilometer north of the compound, through a stand of old-growth spruce, whose trunks were thick as gateposts, and whose roots had lifted the frozen ground in long, curved ridges. The sky was low and white, the particular white of northern November that held snow, somewhere inside it, without committing to release. The air smelled of resin and ice and the mineral sharpness of the creek that ran just north of where they stood. Niamh was barefoot. She'd taken her boots off at the tree line because it had seemed important. The cold ground against her soles, the give of spruce needles and frozen soil, and the particular ancient solidity of a forest floor that had been accumulating itself for longer than she'd been alive. Vesa and 2 other Stone Pass wolves had formed a loose perimeter just inside the trees, their backs to the clearing, presence without intrusion. The warden stood 15 feet away. He hadn't shifted. He was watching her with those grey eyes, and the expression on his face was not what she'd expected from someone who governed an entire mountain territory. It was careful, present. Like he understood that this was not a demonstration of power, but something considerably more irreversible than that. "How does this work?" she said. "I call," he said. "You don't fight it. What if I can't help fighting it? Your wolf will help." He paused. "It will recognize the frequency before you do. What if something goes wrong?" He looked at her, the same way he'd looked at her in the courtyard, like a compass finding north. "I'll be here," he said. "That's not a platitude. I have called wolves back from places much further than 3 years. Yours is not lost. Yours is the most present thing I've felt in 7 years of this work." She believed him. She wasn't sure if that was the mate bond talking or her own judgment, and she wasn't sure it mattered. "Okay," she said. He stepped back. She watched the shift in him, not physical, not yet, something that happened in the quality of the air around him, a pressure change, a deepening of the atmosphere the way the sky deepens before true dark. His breathing slowed, his eyes changed, grey going darker, something ancient surfacing behind them, and then he howled. It was not a sound, or it was a sound and also a dozen other things simultaneously. A frequency that bypassed the ear and went directly to bone, that hit the marrow of her spine and the cartilage of her ribs and the liquid architecture of her inner ear, and kept going, down and down, into the place she hadn't been able to reach in 3 years. It was not a command, it was a truth. It said, "I know you're in there. I know how long you've been waiting. Come up." Niamh's knees hit the ground. The pain was total and white, and she had been told it would be, and it was worse than that, a supernova behind her sternum as her wolf surged upward with 3 years of compressed force, and her bones moved, she could feel them. Her spine lengthening, her hands reshaping, the calcified architecture of herself rearranging at the fundamental level, and beneath the pain, which was extraordinary, was something she had forgotten the name of. Relief. Her wolf came out of her like water through ice that has finally cracked. Not slowly, not in increments, all at once. A burst of silver grey and muscle, and something that generated its own light, soft and steady, the colour of winter sky at the horizon before dawn. She was enormous. She understood that intellectually from the ground up. 4 enormous paws on frozen spruce needles, the world lower and wider and richer in every dimension. She could smell the creek half a kilometer north and every individual tree in the perimeter and the adrenaline in Vesa's blood, and beneath all of it, overwhelming and orienting and exact, the warden. His wolf was dark, not black but dark brown, the color of river stones in winter, and it was vast and it was completely focused on her with an attention that held nothing back. It approached the way you approach something sacred. Head lowered, slow. It touched its nose to hers. The mate bond, which had been humming between them since the courtyard, locked into place with a click she felt in every nerve simultaneously. Two wolves, two sides of the same frequency, finally in the same key. One of Vessa's wolves made a sound, then Vessa herself. Then the third. The silver-grey wolf sat down in the clearing. It pressed its head against the dark wolf's shoulder. 3 years of forge rooms and tarpaulin floors and cold broth, and being approximately equal to a chair. 3 years of a wolf so deep inside her that a healer couldn't find it. A wolf so large that the whole pack had mistaken its absence for inadequacy. The dark wolf curled around the silver-grey wolf, and they breathed together while the snow finally committed to falling, and the spruce trees held their silence, and the 3 stone pass wolves at the perimeter pretended not to be affected and were completely affected. When Neve shifted back, she was shaking hard, her whole body a single sustained tremor, and he was beside her before she'd finished, human again, a coat around her shoulders that smelled like cedarwood and stone. "Let me see," he said, his hands moving to check her, and she realized she'd taken a gash along her ribs at some point during the shift, probably on a route she hadn't noticed. "It's already closing," she said. He looked. It was. The edges of the wound were knitting together, a faint luminescence tracing the seam, gone before she could point to it. He sat back on his heels and looked at her with the expression of a man who has just had a very significant piece of information confirmed. "You're Wolf," he said. "I know. It's not Omega. I got that, yes. What was your mother?" "She was a healer, her lineage." Neve thought about it. Her mother had been private in the way people are private when they carry something important in a place where it might not be safe. She sang, was what came to mind. Old songs in a language Neve had never been able to identify. And she would put her hand on Neve's chest when the nightmares came, and the nightmares would dissolve like they'd never been. "What did she tell you about the Ashfall wolves?" The name hit her like cold air. "Nothing," she said. She never mentioned them. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the Ashfall were the original Stone Pass wolves. "Before my family's line took the territory, before the current Dominion structure existed, the mountain range was governed by a different pack entirely. They disappeared from the record 3 centuries ago. The histories say the last Ashfall Alpha chose to dissolve the line rather than go to war. Why? Because the opponent was stronger." He looked at her. The Ashfall wolves were known for 3 things: healing by touch, weather sense, the ability to feel atmospheric shifts before they were physically measurable, and a wolf so powerful it had to be managed from birth, kept below the surface until the body and the surrounding pack were strong enough to contain the shift. Neve sat very still in the snow. "You think my mother was. I think your mother knew exactly what you were, and I think she spent your entire childhood singing your wolf to sleep, because the alternative was a shift that would have leveled everything within a kilometer." He paused, and when she died in the purge, the suppression held, because the wolf understood. It was waiting for the right conditions. She was quiet for a long time. The snow was falling steadily now, small flakes catching in her hair, melting on her face. "This is a large amount of information to process while sitting on frozen ground," she said. He stood. He held out his hand. She took it. His palm was warm. His grip was careful in a way that said he understood the difference between holding something steady and holding it too tight. He walked her back through the trees. That night, he sat in the chair by the door of the guest quarters while she slept in the real bed, and she knew he was there before she opened her eyes in the morning because she could feel him through the bond, the way you feel a fire across a room. Warmth and presence and the specific security of something that has decided it is staying. She lay still for a moment in the grey early light. The wolf in her chest was settled, content even. She hadn't felt anything in her chest that could be called content in 3 years, and the sensation was strange, almost suspicious, like a muscle that's been clenched so long it doesn't know how to release without flinching. "You don't have to watch the door all night," she said. "I wasn't watching the door," he said. I was reviewing the Iron Hollow assessment files. In the dark, there's ambient light from the window. She sat up. He was in the chair with a folder open on his knee, dressed, boots on, which told her he hadn't slept and found that perfectly functional. You should sleep. I'll sleep when the assessment is filed and Gregor's 30-day clock is official. He looked up. How do you feel? She considered different, she said. Not different bad. Your wolf? Settled. She pressed her hand to her chest where the hum was steady and low and present. She couldn't imagine now what 3 years without it had felt like. She could remember the fact of it, the cold, flat silence, but the actual quality of it was already receding, the way the memory of a toothache fades once it's over. I want to ask you something, she said. He set the folder down. When you're done here, when the assessment is finished and Gregor has his 30-day clock and the 11 wolves on the outer posts have a proper provision schedule, what happens to this, whatever this is? She gestured between them. I'm not a political resource. I know what an Ashfall wolf represents if you're right about what I am. I know what it means symbolically for the Stone Pass Dominion, and I need you to tell me if that's the reason. He looked at her for a long moment. The Dominion, he said, has managed without a symbolic anchor for 3 centuries. It can continue to manage without one. What I cannot continue to manage without is the specific person who, upon learning I am the governing authority of an entire mountain territory, responded by asking me whether I was actually going to fix Gregor's resource allocation problem before I said anything else. She pressed her lips together. You were very concerned about that forge room, he said. I'd cleaned it for 3 years, I know, he said. That's the point. She thought about that. Come to Stone Pass, he said. Not as a symbol, not as a political alignment, as my mate, as whoever you want to be when you're not cleaning someone else's forge room in a building you weren't supposed to be sleeping in. He paused. We have a veterinary program at the Stone Pass compound. It's actually quite good. I'm told the healer is looking for an apprentice with genuine anatomical knowledge and no patience for shortcuts. She stared at him. Vesa mentioned the forge room, he said, not quite apologetically. I asked. She laughed. It surprised her. It was a real laugh, the kind she'd forgotten she had access to, unpolished and genuine, and the warden looked at her like it was something he'd been hoping to hear without knowing he'd been hoping for it. She said yes. They left Iron Hollow on a morning so cold the exhaust from the convoy's vehicles froze in the air behind them in long white shapes. Neve sat in the lead vehicle with the warden and watched the compound gates close in the rear window without the need to look for long. The Stone Pass compound was 3 hours north and 2,000 meters higher. She'd never been. She'd only seen the ridge from Iron Hollow's eastern windows, always the same dark line against the sky, always further than it looked. As the highway climbed and the trees changed and the mountains filled the windshield with their actual scale, she felt her wolf move inside her, not with urgency, with something quiet and anticipatory, the same way you breathe differently when the air changes. Home, the warden said. It's very large. It has been waiting for a long time. She looked at him. She looked at the mountains. She felt the mate bond hum steadily between them, no longer a possibility but a fact, no longer a flutter but a frequency she could feel in her bones. The convoy crested the last ridge, and the Stone Pass compound spread across the mountainside below them, its buildings carved from the dark stone of the ridge itself. Warm light in every window, the whole thing improbable and permanent, and exactly the right size for what she was becoming. The wolf in her chest pressed forward, breathing in, and the mountains held the weight of the convoy, and the new mate, and the 3 centuries of waiting, the way mountains hold everything. Without effort, without comment, simply by being what they are.